And again, is it just an architect's plans? Has the council ever seen it? If the council have seen it, do you have a pre-app report? What is that pre-app report referring to? What are the plans that the council has seen? And does it have planning permission? If it has planning permission, how long left is on that permission? Are there any pre-commencement conditions? And have those pre-commencement conditions been discharged? And have you started on site? Or for you, if you just buy that permission with all those years left that you know you need to discharge all those pre-commencement conditions, then you know you have time to implement that permission. So those are lots of things you need to check. Like I say, it's not just a given. If you want to learn more about the planning process and how you can unlock value out of any property, click the link below to learn more. Someone recently got in touch with me because they were having enforcement trouble. They bought a house that had planning permission on it. They started building out that permission. Now, they did something slightly you shouldn't do, is that they started building a front porch they didn't have permission for, but they were always intending to submit an application to get permission for that. However, when the enforcement officer came on site, because an enforcement officer comes when there's normally like a local complaint by someone, they come to check it out, see what the breach is. But when they checked the site, not only did they have the front porch issue, but they realised that actually it looked like the house was smaller than it had planning permission. And it kind of brought to mind all the issues that can come with, you know, whenever you buy a house, or if you're investigating a house, researching a site that says subject to planning permission, or has development potential subject to getting planning permission, or it has a planning permission in place. On the face of it, you'd think, oh, I've got planning permission, or it's subject to planning, and because there's a nice architect's drawing or whatever, it looks like I can get planning permission, no problem. But there are a few things that are very, very critical to check whether or not if you're going to an auction and your site says subject has development potential subject to planning permission, or has planning permission for XYZ, new homes, extensions, or that kind of thing. Or if you're doing a research and you find that something looks like it's not been built, and it looks like you might need, something has been built and it doesn't have planning permission for it, there's things that you can do to check that as well. But the important thing is to know, hopefully this video will catch someone in time, that when they are researching a site, say they go to Auction House or a Rightmove or something like that, if anything says subject to planning, that is a flag that you need to check, and hopefully this video is going to help you. So first of all, the first thing is, if you see a property and in the brochure or the leaflets or whatever, it says has development potential for 3 houses, that needs to be investigated further. Don't just take that as read. You need to check things like, does it actually have planning permission? If it doesn't have planning permission, what actually is true there? Has the previous owner gone to pre-app? Is there a pre-app report from the officer? Can I see the designs that officer saw so I understand that what their view is actually about? What development were they taking views on? Or is it just architect's drawings? Now, I've seen this quite a few times. Particularly, I remember looking at a site that my wife was once interested in. It was just a strip of land at the end of a terrace, and it was being sold for £5,000, and it said has development potential, and there were some architect's plans to it. And she came over and said, look, you can fit a house on there. I didn't need to look at it. I knew immediately that it wasn't going to get planning permission. So those are the kind of things you need to check. What stage is it actually at? Is it just architect's drawings? Do they have a pre-app response? If so, what is the proposal that pre-app response is actually referring to? And does it have planning permission? And if it has planning permission, what's the references? Going deeper with this, once you find out if it's got planning permission, the next thing you need to do is investigate that planning permission further, because it's all very well if something has planning permission, but if it was 5 years ago and no one's touched it, that planning permission probably doesn't exist anymore. So there's a few things you need to check to make sure that planning permission is actually possible. First of all, was it within the last 3 years? If it's in the last 3 years, it's more likely that planning permission still has time left, because the standard condition on any planning permission must be begun or built or whatever prior to the end of 3 years. It's prior to the end, it's just planning technical terminology, it's boring stuff. So that's what you need to check. Second of all, if you've either passed that 3 years, or you're getting close to the 3 years, or even before the 3 years, you must check that planning decision for pre-commencement conditions. Because if you have, for instance, if you're looking at a site that has 3 months left before the end of the 3 years before it expires, you need to check what pre-commencement conditions are required. Now, a pre-commencement condition is something like work cannot start or development cannot commence until the council sees details of XYZ, and that can be cycle storage, it can be, quite often it's like sustainability measures like drainage systems or something like that. Cycle storage is a classic one. You need to keep that in mind, because if you've only got a couple of months left, you need to take into account the actual length of the process it takes for that pre-commencement condition to be discharged. It goes through the same planning process as a normal planning application does. There's just no consultation, but that doesn't mean that it gets decided any quicker. So if you're getting if you're 2-3 months before the end of the permission and you see a pre-commencement condition that hasn't been discharged, it's very likely that that 3 years is going to lapse and that planning permission is no more, and you're going to have to get planning permission all over again. Now, in a perfect world, you're going to get given a perfect planning permission that is before the 3 years, or if it is over the 3 years, all the pre-commencement conditions have been discharged. So then you know for certain that you can just start building and you don't have to worry about it. But that pre-commencement condition part is really, really important. It's a whole thing about extant planning permissions. If you have discharged all your pre-commencement conditions and you've started implementing it is important. There's loads of case law, and you don't need to get really bogged down in what implementation actually means. It used to be like shoveling the ground, or you dig a trench or something like that. But if you basically start building that permission out, evidently, then that, and all your pre-commencement conditions have been discharged, then in effect your planning permission lives forever. You can take as long as you want to build it out. It's a bit of a silly thing, to be honest, and I'm sure it's going to be changing in the near future. But if you've discharged all your pre-commencement conditions and you start, then your planning permission lasts forever and you needn't worry anymore. So I went a bit deep on that, but the point is that that's the kind of information you need. Don't just go to a real estate agent and then look at a brochure and it says has development potential subject to planning permission, or they have like an architect's visual that looks really nice, that looks like you can build 3 houses. You have to investigate it, and anyone who's been watching my videos obviously will know that you can never take planning for granted. And hopefully someone seeing this who's considering a site and it says subject to planning, that actually don't take it as read. Do a little bit more investigation. Again, is it just an architect's plans? Has the council ever seen it? If the council have seen it, do you have a pre-app report? What is that pre-app report referring to? What are the plans that the council has seen? And does it have planning permission? If it has planning permission, how long left is on that permission? Are there any pre-commencement conditions? And have those pre-commencement conditions been discharged? And have you started on site? Or for you, if you just buy that permission with all those years left that you know you need to discharge all those pre-commencement conditions, then you know you have time to implement that permission. So those are lots of things you need to check. Like I say, it's not just a given. Another example that seems to happen a lot, I get a lot of questions about, is if someone has done something to a property and it doesn't look like they've got permission for it, and you need to submit a certificate of lawfulness to prove that that's lawful to the council. So quite often what happens is you'll go to an auction house or an auction property or a Rightmove listing or whatever, or you're buying something privately, whatever. You're investigating the site and there's alterations or there's things on that site that don't look like they've got planning permission. Now, key bit of investigation you need to do there is, first of all, do those works have planning permission or a type of permission like a certificate or something? If not, why not? And then secondly, if the owner knows, or you both, the owner and the prospective purchaser knows and agree that something doesn't have planning permission, what evidence does that owner have? That is really, really, really key, because as I've touched on videos before, and you can look at other videos where I've touched on certificates. There are requirements that you need to submit in order to get a certificate. So for instance, if you're buying a house from someone and they've done a rear extension and it doesn't look like it's got permission, you need to submit a certificate, or the owner does, or whatever agreement you come to, need to submit a certificate so that you have a legal stamp of approval to say that development is lawful. Now, what evidence looks like is stuff like photos, receipts, contracts, dated emails, dated photos, That's for things like extensions. And by the way, for a house, if you're buying a house with a rear extension, currently the rule is 4 years, but soon that is changing. An act has passed that has told everyone that it's going to change to 10 years. Secondary legislation still needs to come through, so you need to get your applications in now if ever you're worried about that. Once the secondary legislation comes in, it's going to be 10 years. So currently, any alterations to a house only is 4 years, but that's going to change. Anything else is 10 years. So for instance, if you have a yard and it's been over the years, it's actually become its own commercial unit. You know, years ago you put a fence around it and you started trading out of there, maybe for storage or whatever. It's 10 years, and you'll need to provide all the evidence I've mentioned, plus things like receipts, maybe things like council tax, utility bills, contracts between the leaseholder and the freeholder to prove that they were working there, and then anything that shows activity of that business operating. So like receipts of goods received or delivered or works to that property. So the big message for this is that don't take subject to planning or anything related to planning in any sales brochure as given, or don't take it as read, because there's a lot you need to check behind that. It's quite easy to find these things out, but the point is, it's just a case of checking. Don't just take it as read. Don't listen to estate agents either. I've been on site where me and my wife were considering purchasing a property at the time. We were very young and we were looking at buying a flat, and the estate agent said, you can go out 3 meters without planning permission. Well, that wasn't true, because any flats, PD rights don't exist for flats, it's only for houses. So that was my first red flag, that estate agents don't actually know the ins and outs of the planning system. And it's very important that you know that, because estate agents will obviously give you the perfect environment to make you feel comfortable to buy a property, but it's on you to check these things in the background to actually find out if it's a good idea or not. So hopefully this video has caught you in time. Just check all those things I've mentioned at the top, and hopefully you will either find a really good investment, or you've saved yourself from a really bad investment. I hope that's helpful for you. And if you want to find out more about how to use the planning system to unlock any property, or learn more about what I've just talked about more in depth, how do you do the ins and outs, the intricacies of that, then click the link below to learn more, and I'll see you on the other side.